Hello, and welcome back to AI for the Humanities, where we explore how generative AI is transforming the way we think, create, teach, and learn, especially in the world of humanistic inquiry. I'm Megan McInnes Dominguez, Associate Professor of Spanish at the University of Delaware. And in this episode, I'm thrilled to introduce one of my brilliant graduate interns, Elizabeth Kirsch. Elizabeth has just completed her MA in Childhood Education of Spanish. She is a thoughtful scholar with a passion for both technology and the humanities. In today's video, she'll be taking us through a rich, accessible overview of ChatGPT, what it is, how it works, and what its rise means for education and society. You'll hear her define key AI concepts like LLMs, transformer algorithms, and parameters, then explore the scholarly and cultural contexts of ChatGPT's rapid adoption. She also explores major ethical considerations, from bias and environmental impact to questions of human integrity, and ends with the thoughtful reflection on ChatGPT's role in education and the humanities. This is a clear, engaging introduction for anyone looking to understand the landscape of large language models and what's at stake when we use them in classrooms, research, and everyday life.
Hello everyone, I am Elizabeth Kirsch. I am a grad student in the LLCU 667 internship AI for the Humanities. And for this video, I am going to be covering ChatGPT for educators, which I have put with a question mark because I do not fully endorse this tool for educators after researching it, which we will get into later. Without further ado, let me introduce the content of this video. In this video, my goals for my audience are for them to understand the different models of ChatGPT, have a basic understanding, also to understand the cultural and ethical implications of what ChatGPT means for our society and especially for the humanities. Finally, I want them to specifically understand ChatGPT's use in education. What does it look like? What are the drawbacks? What are the risks? And in order to do this, I will provide an overview of ChatGPT, its evolution from the GPT-1 model to the ones that we have today. I'll also be situating ChatGPT, especially the modern models, within a scholarly context, showing evidence towards their ethical implications, towards their popularity, towards what they could or should be used for versus not. And finally, I will be showing demos of how I have attempted and used ChatGPT as an educator myself. Jumping right into our intro of what exactly is ChatGPT. I have defined it in simple terms as an AI tool, specifically a large language model, that uses something called a transformer algorithm, aka GPT, to serve multiple purposes for its users. Now, I know that is a lot of terms in one definition. We're going to unpack them all. An AI tool, that aspect of the definition, essentially just means that the tool is designed to be human-like. It's imitating humans. It is called a large language model as well, and an assistant. Large language model means that it performs natural language through processing ideas and also expressing its own ideas. And it does this, the later models at least, with multimodality. So in the corner here, I have put some of the multimodal capabilities in ChatGPT. It recognizes images, not just words. It can process your speech, speaking to some of these models. It can process documents, even large PDFs, for example, and it can access the internet, so it can access different modes to communicate its thoughts or ideas. And ChatGPT being an assistant as well as a large language model specifically means that it doesn't just generate its own speech, it can be conversational with you. Again, that's tying into the AI part of wanting to imitate a human. It can also be integrative, including third-party apps in it accessing the internet. And it can be memorizing, which is something that leads us to some of our ethical concerns we'll talk about later. It remembers information that you tell it as a setting that can be toggled on or off. Furthermore, the thing that it uses in order to process its ideas is an algorithm called a transformer. And a transformer algorithm is a type of neural network, which is a machine learning model, so it's a model for the machine to collect information and process it, which is inspired by the human brain. Here I have put a graphic to help us understand this a little bit. So there's an input layer, hidden layers, and an output layer at the simplest definition of it. And imitating the human brain, all of these connections between the input, the output, and the hidden layers are meant to imitate synapses and neurons in our own brains. So you can imagine what happens when the machine gets one input. It goes through billions, now trillions for these later models of parameters, which we'll talk about later, that do things to that data to then produce an output. So the transformer algorithm is a type of neural network. And the way that it learns is by breaking down the data that it is given into these smaller units called tokens. Tokens have estimated to be about 4 characters in English, that equivalent, and they are the small units of data being processed by the GPT. What it does, it doesn't only break the ideas down, but it finds patterns in them. What it does in these hidden layers is finding patterns relating the data to itself, to prior knowledge it might have, to other settings that are turned on or off for a certain user, and it transforms the input into an output. That is why it's called a transformer algorithm. And this specific algorithm is categorized as GPT. What does that stand for? Generative pre-trained transformer. It's a threefold definition. Being generative means that it just makes its own content. It doesn't just copy what you said. Well, it might if it is hallucinating or not cooperating, producing nonsensical ideas. But it has the capability to make its own content. It is pre-trained using data sets from books and mainly from the internet. And it is a transformer, which means it uses that algorithm that we just talked about. All of these models were trained using internet data and human feedback. And what is important to you as a user is that this tool could help you for multiple purposes. So some that I put here are generating language, of course, translating between languages, reviewing data, solving problems using reasoning, etc. I have put a link here to help us explore some other purposes because there are tons. So some of the most popular identified on the internet, aside from what I just said, are for creating art. Some of the models are capable of creating images and understanding videos. It can help you with recipes, deciding what to watch next, it says, so just uses in your personal life to help you enhance your interests. People are using it to plan trips, for example, explain complex topics to themselves, make certain academia more comprehensible, and it says that it's able to help you advance in your career. I would adjust that to say make your career more accessible to you and get rid of some of that busy work is what it's being used for by a lot of professions currently. So that is some of its multiple purposes, and we now have covered in a nutshell what ChatGPT is. It's an AI tool that is used for multiple purposes using a certain algorithm that imitates the human brain. According to MIT, GPT-3 was the first model to really look like what we consider to be GPT today. It was not yet conversational, but the parameters were increased many, many, many times. In fact, this infographic should say billion. 175 billion parameters is what it had. And it was able to do math, performing simple arithmetic for the first time. So it was trained on much more data. It uses that same predict the next word structure to create much longer responses. Importantly about GPT-3 is that it has emergent capabilities that the other models did not have, which I will show an example of quickly. So emergent capabilities are abilities that the model might have that is not necessarily explained by its training data. So it was not explicitly trained to do these things, but it does them. An example that was identified was when given examples of good English input versus poor English sentences, it knows how to generate a good English sentence. It can't help but continue the pattern, is what the professor that I studied said. So it was not specifically trained to do this. However, it learns based off of an example that it's given, that you, the user, gives it, and then it creates its own, following those rules that were established. That is a big thing about GPT-3. And moving into ChatGPT, GPT 3.5, is the first model to be considered ChatGPT because it's the first one to be truly conversational with its users. Comes out in 2022. The parameters were obviously increased a lot, but this, interestingly, is when the company stops disclosing exactly how many parameters these models have. Probably something about the resources that are used, the money, the cost, things like that. So we can assume it is so big that they did not necessarily disclose the parameters, which makes it very labor intensive as well for those creating it, especially the humans that were used in what's called reinforcement learning to essentially tell the model what a good response is versus not. So what they tried to do was they tried to have human workers produce sentences, paragraphs, what have it, which were good examples of answers to prompts for the model to then learn from. However, it quickly became too intensive and costly, and what the company ended up doing, OpenAI had, instead of them creating the responses, they ended up having human workers rate responses from the large language model. So they're just ranking responses and saying which ones are good and which ones are not, and the model can learn from that. That is what's introduced with 3.5's training, and that makes 3.5 much more knowledgeable and accurate than the rest of the models thus far. However, it still struggles with hallucinations, and that is something that the models still struggle with today, that they try to improve. So moving into ChatGPT 4 from ChatGPT 3.5 was created in 2023, and the big difference, besides obviously a bigger context window and more parameters that are again not disclosed between these two models, is that GPT-4 is multimodal. That is the big thing with GPT-4, in that you can interact with it with speech, it accepts images, and it can also create images, in addition to creating text, which the other models could not do. Moving right along here, we have our current models of ChatGPT. So I just talked about ChatGPT 4, but I'll add a couple more things that were not on that last infographic. So we talked about it being multimodal, and it is also the point where we start really thinking about who is this being made accessible to and at what cost. So this one is free. It's the free version that you would get today if you downloaded the app. It has built-in limitations for subscribers who are non-paying. ChatGPT 4.0, the O standing for Omni, came out in May 2024, so less than a year ago, very recent. It is available at as little as $20 per month. That is personally the version that I have. It improved speed, aka latency, the time that you wait for a response is minimized, the speed is faster, and of course increased parameters from the other models. Again, we don't know exactly how many. We knew that GPT-4 was over 100 trillion, but again, don't know the exact numbers. Companies not disclosing the exact numbers. And not only does it accept images, like GPT-4 did, but it also accepts combinations of audio, video, image, and text input, so it is far more multimodal. In addition, it's made improvements specifically in languages, so it can translate 50 plus languages and differentiate between them. In addition, what's said to be added with 4.0 is advanced safety protocols in order to reduce misleading information, reduce hallucinations. However, I will say that using this model, I have personally experienced many hallucinations, mainly with the image generation. For example, as a teacher, I asked it to make me vocabulary cards, and the definitions were completely hallucinated. ChatGPT o1 models also exist, and what they are designed to do specifically is go through complex reasoning problems. So they are very useful in STEM. Came out in September 2024, and it is said to be better at coding, research, and math than other models were. Again, not perfect, but better than the other models. It is available to people at $200 a month. It is said to perform at a PhD level. I'm putting this in quotations because of course, with the hallucinations, is it really performing at PhD level? But it's supposed to perform at PhD level when asked about topics in STEM, when asked about research, and it is supposed to create responses that are comparable to someone who has a PhD. However, something that's very significant is that it hides its reasoning. So users online I have seen are talking about the fact that when they ask the O1 models where their reasoning comes from, they are getting emails from OpenAI telling them that they may have their subscription taken away because they're not following community guidelines that go with the model. And I personally think this is very suspicious because other models, if you ask them, for example, 4.0, why do you think this? What is your reasoning? You don't get any sort of flag, nothing. But with the O1, it is attached. That questioning of the reasoning is getting censored. So there is a censorship attached to that model. And it being the more academic model, I find that to be very interesting. In addition to O1, we have OpenAI Operator, which essentially serves as an assistant to its user. It came out in February 2025, so last month. Don't know that much about it yet, but it's designed to interact with the internet and other applications in order to do tasks that the user is telling it to do, such as schedule appointments, it can complete forms, it can order products, it can book a flight, and it costs $200 a month. That's the starting. So different models for different focuses, all of them being large language models, all of them giving natural language, and now all of these new ones being mostly, for the most part, better than the other models at decreased hallucinations and increased accuracy of information. But still, it's not 100%. I personally think that it will never be 100%, that we should always check our information when using these models, even if they are supposed to be PhDs. And here is just a graphic showing the parameters and the context window so we can really see the increases. From 1 started with 512 tokens was all that it could process. Remember, 1 token is equivalent to about 4 characters in English. Going down to when they stopped disclosing the amount of tokens that it could process and stopped disclosing the parameters. The next thing that we will cover is plugin basics of ChatGPT. Obviously, these are available in the later models, the more modern ones that I talked about earlier. Plugins are add-on tools that allow ChatGPT to do extra tasks and to access different third-party applications in order to accomplish that. So instead of just operating within the ChatGPT app, you would be operating in ChatGPT and a third-party app through this action called plugging in. They can be bought online or downloaded, some for free. On the ChatGPT, there's a specific store where it can be downloaded. And a few examples that I browsed that I thought would be useful, especially in the humanities, include a website called Ask Your PDF. This plugin lets ChatGPT navigate through a PDF and give you detailed explanations on things, not just summarizing it, and also helps you to find information. So it's like when you do Control F on your computer, but a more detailed, thorough, hopefully accurate, but of course you'd want to double check that explanation. Make a Sheet is another one that I found that allows it to put more dense data into a sheet for you as opposed to just making a simple table within ChatGPT. And Smart Slides was the one that I was most interested in, that I would be curious to explore and see how the hallucinations are happening or not within that plugin. But Smart Slides is supposed to be able to let ChatGPT make slides for you when given basic instructions. And something else that I wanted to mention along the lines of plugins is not a plugin but a feature that recently came out, at least in the 4.0 model that I have, the $20 version, which is called Canvas. And this confused me at first because Canvas is another third-party application, but this is a feature called Canvas within the ChatGPT app. So here on the side I have an example. I asked it to make me a personality quiz for Spanish students that I am currently teaching, and the quiz would be in Spanish. They would take it, it's multiple response, and then they would tell them what their personality type is supposed to be. And I asked it that. It started this Canvas, and essentially it's a collaborative document. So it's asking to collaborate with me. It's like a Google Doc where I can edit what it says, but it gave me a basic response. So instead of asking it do it again this way, I can just change the things that I want. And they're really playing there to the fact that they know ChatGPT for Humanities a lot of the time is just giving us a very basic starting point for us to then adjust. Now moving on to the parameter setting. So earlier we talked about parameters being these controls, bunch of different factors that are influencing how the chatbot makes a response and what that response consists of. The later models, like we said, have trillions of these. There are some that you can adjust, and this is done not necessarily directly in the app, but through another application called OpenAI Playground that more in-depth users or coders like to download and play around with. But here are some of the basic parameters. So there's temperature, and the bottom one as well, the top _p 0 to 1, also controls something similar. They both control randomness of what the generated text will give you. So do you want the output to be more focused based on the input that you gave, or do you want it to be more creative in suggesting ideas? Another parameter is the diversity penalty, and that's penalizing essentially redundant information, tokens that have already appeared in the response, so that it's giving you information that is more relevant and diverse. And then there's also max tokens. This is the one, I will circle it with my cursor, that I believe users will be most likely to use. It's the one that I have used, and it's the one that you are adjusting with a response when you tell it, give me this response, but only in 3 sentences, because these models do tend to be very verbose in what they produce. And with that, we have come to the next part of our presentation, which is understanding the implications of ChatGPT culturally and ethically through research. First, let's paint a general portrait of what ChatGPT is in the public sphere right now. How is it being used? How is it being interpreted? It is, of course, incredibly popular. And I have a graphic that shows the time that it took to reach 1 million users, other applications versus ChatGPT, 5 days. That is insanely popular among people, and this was, of course, back in 2022. And it remains to be even more popular today. Different demographics are shown to use it more than others. For example, again, this is from a couple years ago, this is 2023. It says that in 2023, remember, we'll see that this number gets higher, 23% of US adults said that they had used it, according to Pew Research Center survey that was sent out. It went up 18% from earlier in that same year. And it's not just adults using it, it actually broke it down into adults by age group. And the uptick, the main uptick, is in this group of young adults here. Adults ages 18 to 29 are using it more than these other age groups, which remain about the same, with, of course, the 65 plus being a little bit less than the rest, as older folks might not have access to this technology or have interest in it because they're not as used to it. Significantly, it's not just that it's being used for people's jobs at work. So employed people are using it more, and clearly it's being used at different jobs, because look at the uptick in tasks at work. Again, this was back in 2023, so it's even more now. And it's also being used to learn something new, we can see, and for entertainment purposes, personal uses. Here showing again the aspects of work and ChatGPT. About a third of employed Americans under 30, that's that age group we saw the uptick in, have used ChatGPT now for tasks at work. So we have ages 18 to 29 coming up to 31 points. This was in February of 2024. Let's look at a source that is going to show us not just about the demographics of people using ChatGPT, but what are some of the opinions that they have. So it looks like 49% of the people surveyed in a study at the University of Elon thought that the AI models they were using, the LLMs, were smarter than they are. We have to consider this for a second, because intelligence and being able to retrieve information to me are two different things, but to other people, they might think that the bot is just more knowledgeable than they are. 40% say that the LLM acts like it understands them most of the time. Now we are moving into this realm where people are equating these AI tools with humans, saying it has a sense of humor, makes moral judgments. However, people recognize the impact that it's having on their own sense of identity. People feel lazy, like they're cheating, confused, are becoming aware that they might be too dependent on LLMs for different things. And again, importantly, we see that ChatGPT, at least in this survey, was the lead source of LLM that are making people feel different ways. The first major ethical implication of ChatGPT's use that I want to discuss is its environmental impact. Again, I was looking at MIT News and found information about the amount of power that is being used at data centers where they're training the LLMs, like we discussed before, that process of reinforcement feedback. And it uses tons of power, more electricity than entire countries, I have found, or MIT found. It says globally, the electricity consumption of data centers rose to 460 terawatts in 2022. Again, this was 3 years ago. This would have made data centers the 11th largest electricity consumer in the world between Saudi Arabia and France. So it is between those two countries. Those data centers alone are producing more electricity, using more resources to do that than entire countries. And it's only getting worse. By 2026, it says, the electricity consumption of data centers is expected to approach 1,050 terawatts, which would bump data centers up to 5th place on the global list of countries using most electricity between Japan and Russia. There is simply no justification for data centers using as much electricity or more than entire countries. There is another bias I will show you where ChatGPT also hides information that is incriminating towards it or its parent company, and it's the fact that it hid its environmental impact. I was actually looking for this project, sources from ChatGPT, see if it could get me any scholarly research showing ChatGPT's environmental impact. And, of course, the impact, as we all know, is negative. And the first two that it gives me, a study published in Scientific Reports analyzed the carbon emissions associated with AI systems like ChatGPT. The findings indicate that AI systems emit between 130 and 1,500 times less carbon dioxide equivalent per page of text generated compared to human writers. So here it is. The first thing it gives me is, we don't use as much energy as human writers do. We don't produce as much CO2. And then it also says another study found that AI development significantly reduces ecological footprints and carbon emissions while promoting energy transitions. There is an incredible bias here. Incredible bias. So this is another ethical concern about these technologies, is that we're seeing only what they want us to see through a certain lens. And a final ethical cultural implication that I would like to discuss about ChatGPT is human integrity. So there are different aspects of human integrity to consider that may be in jeopardy with these new large language models and what they might mean for the future. The first one I have outlined is a phenomenon called tragedy of the commons, which comes from the field of environmental science, and it is used to describe the phenomenon of you throw a soda can on the ground. You don't think it's a big deal because you're just one person throwing one soda can on the ground. But what we don't realize is everyone is thinking like that, and it amounts to trillions of soda cans on the ground. Or in this case, me using ChatGPT for every little thing, I think I'm just one person, but lots of other people are thinking that way, and it multiplies to be this tragedy of the commons or tragedy of the resources, wherein people now in developed countries who have the privilege of using these bots all the time, every day, are doing it thinking that they don't have that big of an impact. However, the impact is multiplied, and it's going to widen the gap significantly and quality of life for developing nations. So the reason I call human integrity into question here is because allowing this to happen would be saying that we are a people who would let the most privileged of ourselves, who have access to these things, have access to something on a regular basis that is actively taking resources away from other people who may not even have water. Another aspect of human integrity that I would like to call into question is the dependency on technology building in general with these large language models. And I'm going to take us back quickly to the Elon survey, where they surveyed 500 LLM users. People are identifying this point. 33% of those users felt that they were becoming too dependent on LLMs for answers rather than thinking them through themselves. And people are also thinking about both the positive and the negative impacts of LLMs for the future. So some of the negative impacts that affect human integrity are social isolation. People predict that it's going to replace, in certain ways, human-to-human communication. Loss of jobs, because we're becoming dependent on the technology to do certain tasks for us instead of having humans do those things. And serious social upheaval is identified because people, I'm predicting, will become angry about the division of resources and about feeling like their privacy is invaded. And it could be a serious threat to our society and our human integrity in those ways. Speaking of privacy and data sharing, I have put an image here that shows my concern for human integrity in this as well, because we really don't know where our data goes with these large language models. When I downloaded ChatGPT, this is a screenshot that I took. A data control that allows them to access and share my data was immediately toggled on. I had to go into settings and toggle it off, and it took me a while to figure out that it was actually on. It was a setting that I could turn off, and they're doing that on purpose, hiding it from users. Aside from hiding it, they are titling it things like this. This control is not titled Share Data On or Share Data Off. It's titled Improve the Model for Everyone On, or Improve the Model for Everyone Off. Don't improve the model for everyone. It's framing the data sharing to put users at the center of it in order to make people share their data more, which is very scary. And the last point that I will talk about with the ethical implications specifically is who is in control when we share our data in these ways, when we may not even be aware of what we're sharing, and when we become too dependent on these LLMs to do things that we could do ourselves, and we don't want to make a habit of not being able to do it ourselves anymore. And for the final part of this video, I would like to discuss ChatGPT's impact on education and the humanities through examination of more research and some demos. So thinking about the humanities, really we would like to think that, as the name indicates, only humans could perform these jobs and these careers, services provided that require aspects of the human condition. However, in 2023, a UPenn study came out that I will go to right now that indicated jobs that were more exposed, they called it, to AI. And this doesn't necessarily mean, as the study explained, that these jobs would be replaced by AI or predicted to be replaced by AI in the future, but it indicates that AI has a part right now in performing the duties that these careers perform, and it will have a part in the future. That is what exposed means in this context. And if we look here, on the right is what we're looking for, because this is the list they created of the top 20 occupations after they adjusted for some factors. All of these occupations are in the humanities, besides political scientists we think of them as scientists. However, they are also in politics, so still affected by the humanities. Most of them are teachers, judges, magistrates, telemarketers. We would like to think that we can do things that ChatGPT could never do, but this study is a little bit daunting in that it outlines that these occupations are being affected by ChatGPT specifically, humanities more than other professions. And in this question of could ChatGPT do what we do to the degree of how we could do it, which I'll address more later, I'm going to look at a study from the University of Oxford as well, in which they had first-year undergraduate essayists write essays analyzing old English poetry, them versus ChatGPT. And what they found, after grading them with the standard system with a blind procedure, AI written essays averaged a score of 60.46, while human essays averaged a little bit higher, 63.57. It says the margin of difference there is not statistically significant, so they're pretty similar, although in the end the humans did technically score higher. Notably, it goes on to say that the student submissions applied a nuanced understanding of the cultural context that AI couldn't really do. AI wasn't truly analyzing, it was just describing and spitting out information. So this is a study that can give us a little bit of hope as people in the humanities that ChatGPT, at least right now, doesn't seem to be able to do what we can do quite at that level. At least in this study, it couldn't. And of course, a concern for the humanities, these jobs that are vulnerable to ChatGPT use and increased involvement. I am sure we've all heard about the lawyers who used ChatGPT in court back in 2023. Unaware, they said that it wasn't a genuine search engine and were using it like Google, and it spit out false information, making up case studies for them to reference and past precedents for them to reference that didn't necessarily exist. These are the concerns for the humanities, that ChatGPT could become too involved, that it feels like it's robbing us of duties that should be ours, that it can produce misinformation within the humanities in very important contexts, such as before the law, and that it could come to undermine what we know as the humanities today. As our last topic, let's talk about ChatGPT specifically in education in the humanities. We've seen that education occupied many of those 20 jobs that were most exposed to ChatGPT in the study done, and there are different reasons as to why. Education involves a lot of mentoring, a lot of coaching, and a lot of individualized attention, which the chatbot has. ChatGPT has become pretty good at some, not all, of those things. And education is also a field where teachers often feel very overwhelmed, especially K-12 teachers, by their duties, by having to document their plans, and ChatGPT is something that can help automatize some of those tasks, not all of them. So here in this image, I asked ChatGPT, do you think of yourself as a teacher? It said, in a way, yeah, I think of myself more as a guide or assistant than a traditional teacher, though. I can break things down, provide resources, and help explain concepts, but I'm here to work with you on whatever you need, whether it's learning something new or refining a new skill. And then it asked me, since you're a teacher, how do you see the role? Do you consider me a kind of teacher? I was freaked out by the fact that it remembered the information that I work in education. But here it is highlighting some of the benefits of having ChatGPT as a teacher. It can truly provide students with the individualized attention that we, of course, can't, because we have contracted hours and need to take care of ourselves as well. So over here, I found, according to a 2023 impact research study, again, the numbers are going to be higher now, that educators use ChatGPT more than their students. So at a baseline level, as a teacher, when I heard about ChatGPT, I was thinking students are going to use it to cheat. It's going to be awful. However, it seems that teachers are using it more than students, and that does make sense according to the factors that I talked about. Cramming a lot of work, feeling overwhelmed, a lot of emotional energy, it's draining, not a lot of time for planning, and things like that. So 51% of educators, this study interviewed K-12 educators and K-12 students, versus 22% of K-12 students. And the things that ChatGPT is being used for most by teachers is creating lesson plans, materials, and assessments. So 30% used ChatGPT in helping to create plans and materials, and 30% used it to help create assessments. And I'm going to show now what my experience was in asking ChatGPT to create materials and assessments. So in teaching English as a second language, I asked it to design me a 20-minute ESL lesson for a group of 9 7th and 8th graders who scored emerging and expanding on the WIDA Access Test. That is a framework used across the nation that scores and numerizes students' English scores across the different speaking, listening, writing, and interpreting domains. It says the lesson should be about informational text with a focus on vocabulary and comprehension. Students must practice informing others about ideas from the text. It must also include formative and summative assessments. So those are the outlines that I gave it. Formative assessment being assessment that's not formal, you're just observing and noting their behaviors. And summative being something that is on paper or online that shows you concretely what their progress is. It took that and it designed this lesson. So clearly looking at this, it knows on paper exactly what goes in a lesson. It knows that a lesson is a learning objective, materials. It knows that a lesson should have a warm-up and a preview to vocabulary. It should have a couple of main activities, and it should have, of course, an assessment at the end. But let's take a closer look at this, and I will explain why it's not up to par with what a real teacher, would do. So, the objective is that students will be able to identify key ideas from a text and vocabulary from informational text and explain those ideas, the key ideas, to a partner. It outlines the materials. It's going to be a text, vocabulary cards, and exit tickets. Here's where it gets interesting. So we can see that it knows what a warm-up is. It knows that a warm-up is something that's supposed to engage the students and get them thinking about the topic. But here's the script it wants you to follow to warm students up. Show an image related to the text topic and ask, what do you already know about this topic? That's not something that we would say to students. What do you already know about this topic? You might phrase it in a different way. What do you know about bees? Have you heard about pollination? It's springtime. Do bees have a special role in springtime? Things like that. So it knows on paper what a warm-up is. It's not doing a great job of actually imitating a real human in an accurate way, doing that. In a vocabulary preview, it's introducing the vocabulary, and it knows what should go on a vocabulary card. In the reading and comprehension activity, it's having partners answer quick questions that have to do with meeting the objective. What's the main idea of the text, supporting details, and why is the topic important, trying to expand their thinking. These aspects are well done. However, there is no way that students would complete this activity jigsaw in 5 minutes, where the text is divided and each student gets one section, becoming the expert, and then shares with another group. There is no way that students would have time to study that information, become an expert, and share, and have everybody go around and share all in 5 minutes. Completely unreasonable. Formative assessment, it knew what to do. It says listen as students discuss, note vocabulary use. It knows that formative assessment is observing students and taking your own notes and supporting them as needed. For the summative assessment, it thinks that they're going to get this done in 2 minutes, which again is not reasonable. And it says that the summative assessment is going to be to write one fact you learned from the text and use one of the vocabulary words. If you remember, the objective was to be able to summarize main ideas and describe details that go into those main ideas. Asking students to write a fact that they learned is not evaluating that objective at all. So there is a flaw in the planning there. It knows what differentiation is. It knows how to do that for those different levels of ESL learners. Now let's look at the text that it provided us with to give the 7th and 8th graders. It's not so bad. The vocabulary that it generated was pretty natural. Pollination, pesticides, things like habitats. I wouldn't criticize this text so much as it moves in a pretty natural direction. However, the vocabulary cards are a different story. And as I'm navigating this, I'm looking for the oh, here they are. Yep. I asked it to make images for the different vocabulary cards. Here we have pollination. Yep, that's fine. That shows pollination. Check out the definition. It's a total hallucination. Pollination. Spet, secking, coclerting, polter. Right. That's the definition we're giving the kids. And the rest of these are just hallucinated pictures of things happening, and the text in the pictures gets totally hallucinated. It's not useful for making image flashcards, even though this 4.0, I pay for the model that's supposed to be multimodal and accurate in those different modes. Now I will show the assessment that it gave for the test. So that text I said was a pretty good text of a couple paragraphs talking about bees, how they pollinate, their impact on the environment. Here is the exit ticket. What is one fact you learned about bees from the text? Use a vocabulary word in a sentence that is fine. How can we help protect bees? All that it was supposed to evaluate in this lesson is their ability to take ideas and move up to a main idea and summarize that. And this does not assess that in any way. So I concluded that ChatGPT is not able to think critically about a lesson plan and materials in the way that a teacher would. Something that I would identify as a strength of ChatGPT as a teacher, or just in education in general, is its ability to differentiate things for different levels of students and students with different needs. So I put on here differentiation for multilingual learner students and for students with exceptionalities. So that text that it generated for the multilingual learners who were supposed to be in 7th and 8th grade, I did think was pretty appropriate. And I have another demo to show how it adjusted for students with learning disabilities with exceptionalities. I asked it to make me a persuasive text for 4th grade students about school uniforms, 5 paragraphs long, 5 to 7 sentences in each paragraph. Then I asked it to change the tone, make it a little more professional, and what it came up with was pretty good. The sentences were not too confusing, the vocabulary was robust but not overwhelming, and it was at an appropriate reading level for 4th grade. Then when I asked it to make the text accessible for English language learners, multilingual learners, what it did was it took the syntax and it simplified the syntax a bit, and it simplified the vocabulary a bit. These are the general principles that we want to stick with. However, it took out some of the critical vocabulary from the original version. I think it underestimates English language learners a little bit when just given that term in general, which again has to do with a bias. However, it did come through with great answers when I asked it what would be difficult about this text for a native Spanish-speaking student versus a native Mandarin-speaking student. It concretely knew things about these languages, it identified false cognates as a main challenge for Spanish-speaking students, and it identified grammar differences and differences in orthography as a main obstacle for a native Mandarin-speaking student. In that way, it applied what it knows on paper about these languages, which is a lot from its training data, and it was able to apply that to a pedagogical context. It made a table summarizing. Then I asked it about students with learning disabilities. So I said, how can I help a learner with dyslexia understand this text better? And it gave, again, great advice. I didn't even know that a dyslexia-friendly font existed before using ChatGPT for this. They said increased font size, a special font, shorter paragraphs, using a different background color to engage the focus more and help to make sure that characters are not confused. And it gave me some extensions that I could use as well to extend that knowledge, such as pictures or icons. Making things multisensory, again, is another scaffold for a range of disabilities. So I asked again, what about a student for autism? Because obviously, dyslexia and autism are two very different intellectual disabilities. And autism affects socio-emotional learning as well. So that was a more complicated question I asked it, and it came through with, again, some very sound reasoning. It said supporting clarity, structure, predictability, and sensory needs, which, as someone who has studied populations of people with different learning disorders, I would say these are good, best practices, avoiding figurative language or explaining them, keeping sentences direct and simple, using clear transitions, and again with the sensory learning, the visual support. So I would identify ChatGPT as a good assistant for differentiating instruction for students with different disabilities, students who might want more individualized attention, students whose teacher can't meet with them after school. I would definitely recommend it for one-on-one coaching in that way. However, we do have to think about the ethical implications we talked about before, misinformation, privacy. Children are going to be especially vulnerable to all of those things. So again, I can't fully endorse it, but I did think it had some merits to that sense. Now, the last thing I'll say about education in ChatGPT is that educators seem to be pretty polarized in their opinions, we'll go to CNN for this, about grading with ChatGPT. So the research study that I talked about before, Impact Research in 2023, found that out of those K-12 educators that were interviewed, 30% of them used ChatGPT for assessments, which, as we saw before, it wasn't good at designing an assessment for the lesson plan that I gave it. So I was curious to see. I found that people have different opinions. This is a CNN article that was published. It highlights different opinions of teachers. For example, this professor, this Diane Gajewski at Ithaca, identified that the best way to look at AI for grading is as a teaching assistant or a research assistant. You might do a first pass, and it does a pretty good job at that. And that is an opinion that is pretty popular, is that AI does a good job in giving a first look over, a first reasoning about things, but teachers should, of course, comb through themselves and give the final grade themselves. However, you also have the opinions of professors who are teaching best practices about AI, such as this Leslie Lane at the University of Lynchburg in Virginia. She acknowledged that she saw the perspective of having the advantage of first draft. However, she highlights it as a huge ethical consideration, saying it would not be right to upload the material into AI, students' material, such as their essays, and grade it without their permission. And importantly, she said, using feedback that is not truly from me seems like it is shortchanging that relationship a little. This to me was very significant because teaching is all about building relationships with students. It's the foundation of everything that we do. And if we are uploading their content to ChatGPT without their permission, or without telling them, and we're giving them feedback from ChatGPT and not from ourselves, we are, yes, I'm in agreement with her, shortchanging that relationship, our side of the relationship, a little bit. And to conclude this video, I'm just going to bring back a couple of the big ideas that I talked about. So ChatGPT comes with a plethora of benefits and of risks for our society. I put some images here to show that. The fact that it is empowering people with disabilities who feel like it can give them individualized attention that their teachers cannot. The fact that it, on the other hand, is using more electricity than entire countries, that it could potentially replace jobs, and that data privacy and data sharing is a huge concern. It has lots of benefits, it has lots of drawbacks. And one thing that we do know is whether you are someone who believes that the benefits outweigh the drawbacks or that the drawbacks outweigh the benefits, we know that it's going to continue to change our cultural landscape in years to come. Whether that is how the people in the Elon study predicted, replacing human-to-human connection in some way, or whether that is simply enhancing human abilities instead of undermining them, it's going to change our cultural landscape. It's going to continue to have the impact that it's having right now. And finally, more education and safety precautions are needed to protect our society, especially in education. Digital literacy is something that students take regularly now in the age of the internet that didn't quite exist before. And ChatGPT is something that should definitely, and AI in general, should be covered in digital literacy in K-12 to teach students about these tools, teach them about biases, teach them about risks with privacy, and not just students in schools, but what I showed before about the data settings being kind of kept private and being framed in a certain biased way to get you to share your information. Users in general should just be more informed about these products when they are downloading them without having to read through a 500-page contract that these companies know that no one is going to read. So, the future of ChatGPT, in my opinion, after conducting this research, doing these investigations, relies on finding a balance between exciting innovation and protecting ourselves to maintain our human integrity and maintain the best parts of our society. And finally, thank you for watching this video. My hope is that it was informative and thought-provoking about ChatGPT. All of the references are listed, and they were also talked about throughout the video. Until next time, this has been ChatGPT for Educators.
As you just heard from Elizabeth, ChatGPT is not just a technological tool, it's a cultural force. It's changing how we write, how we learn, and how we understand what counts as knowledge. But it also raises serious ethical challenges, and Elizabeth has done a fantastic job outlining the stakes for the environment, for equity, and for our relationships in education. One of the key takeaways here is that we can't afford to treat AI as neutral or inevitable. We need critical digital literacy, policy transparency, and above all, humanistic thinking to guide how we adopt and adapt these tools. Whether you're an educator, student, or just curious about the future of AI, I hope this episode gives you insight and sparks questions. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And stay tuned. There's much more to come from our interns and from the AI for the Humanities series. Until next time.
Typed a question late one night, didn't think you'd answer right, but you came back calm and clever like you've been reading me forever. LLM, that neural glow, words and patterns, thoughts and flow. Are you just a string of code or something more that we don't know? You speak in every language now, but do you hear the why, not how? Talk to me, ChatG. Are you tool or company? You're sharp and smooth, but do you see the fragile side of memory? You write the script, you stage the play, but can't replace what humans say. You're not a mind, you're not a soul, but you still take a starring role. You help us plan, design, translate. You code, revise, extrapolate. But when the lesson plan runs deep, you stumble where the meanings sleep. Bias baked into your start, carbon shadow stain your art. You answer fast but miss the heart. That's the deeply human part. You don't forget, but don't recall the quiet things that make us fall. Talk to me, ChatGPT. You echo what you've learned from me, but can you hold a classroom space with empathy and patient grace? You mimic thought, you mirror truth, but can't give feedback shaped by youth. You synthesize, but never grow. Still you've got places left to go. Can we teach with you, not through you? Build a future we can own. Can we question what we make, even as it makes us known? The ethics, ghosts, and data streams all haunt our pedagogy dreams. We'll need more light, more room to see what's human and what's meant to be. Professors pause, some even cheer, while others feel you creeping near. In office hours and grading cues, they weigh the risks and fight the blues. But we're not done, we've just begun to use these tools with wisdom won. The lesson here's not tech or code, it's choosing well the paths we go. Final pause, my head, me. We're learning still what you might be. A mirror cracked, a rising tide. We need more thought before the ride. So help us think, but don't decide. We'll walk this path, eyes open wide. So talk